Yes, and that's right. Getting into the special interview with political historian Dr. Sishiwa Sishiwa. He's here to offer his sharp analysis on some of the latest happenings ahead of the August elections. Doc, good morning and welcome to the Red Hot Breakfast. We haven't had you on the show in a while. Good morning to you. How have you been?
Good morning, Peter, and good morning, listeners. I've been very well, and yes, we haven't spoken for a while, so I'm very happy to be back.
Doc, let's get started. We saw pockets of violence during the nomination of MPs, mainly involved MPs, and one of the casualties was Gary Nkombo, who ended up seeking medical treatment. What does this level of violence say about, the state of the democracy in the UPND as we go into this election?
Well, I think it says a number of things. First, it demonstrates the lack of respect for the freedom to participate in political affairs. As you know, participation is a fundamental principle of liberal democracy, and it's even a constitutional principle in our case. People, can participate in political life, in elections as voters or as candidates. And individuals who are unhappy that they were not adopted in their political organizations have the freedom to participate as candidates in elections by standing as independent candidates or indeed as a candidate on other platforms. So when you have what happened yesterday, where a member of the ruling party is prevented from exercising his right to participate by standing as a candidate, it makes a very sad reading about the culture, the lack of internal party democracy within the UPND. Secondly, I think that it demonstrates how violence is embedded in the UPND. We often talk about how bad the PF cadres were, how violent they were, but the UPND cadres are not angels. They have shown us over the last 4.5 years that they are also violent. And it was sad to see the cadres beating, Gary Nkombo. But when you actually look back over the last 4 years, you see UPND cadres have been doing this, without consequence. They have been beating opposition politicians. I remember some Socialist Party, I think people were beaten during one of the by-elections. So opposition politicians have been treated much worse by UPND cadres, and usually in full view of the police as well. So the only difference is that the person on the receiving end of injustice and police inaction is this time around a member of the governing party. And that's why you have seen this condemnation. Much of it focuses on Gary as a person rather than on the lawlessness that he has produced this kind of thing.
What do you make of the reaction from the president regarding this incident? He called on the police to make sure that they arrest the perpetrators.
Well, I think that sounds like a hollow attempt to really condemn this thing, because when you think about it, the person who was leading those cadres reportedly works at State House, and so you could actually even say that those attacks are sponsored by State House, because there's no way a worker of the president could have done what he did without the blessing of his boss. So when you see a president, for example, coming out to attack that, start thinking, oh, is this an attempt to simply cover himself up? And second, Liswaniso, I think the UPND National Youth Chairperson, in the presence of the president, warned UPND candidates or UPND members that if you are not adopted in the ruling party, do not attempt to stand as an independent candidate, because you are going to come for you. The president never repudiated those remarks by his National Youth Chairperson. He never distanced himself. So when you see cadres do what they did to Gary yesterday, for example, you get a sense that they are implementing what the National Youth Chairperson said, and which the president, through inaction or silence, endorsed. So you can't come around tomorrow and condemn what the cadres have done when you all along were very happy with this kind of message that produced the outcome. And the other final point, I think, is that, if you look at the president's conduct in relation to other acts of violence, you realize that the president does not hate violence, especially when the culprits are members of his inner circle or UPND cadres. Remember the case of J.J. Banda, the former, Putauke independent member of parliament. He was attacked and abducted by people who, according to J.J., included Clayson Hamasaka, Levi Ngoma, and I think Trevor Mwinde. two of those three people work with the president at State House, just like the person who was leading the attacks yesterday. To date, the president has never condemned the attacks on JJ Banda, nor demanded that the people who were responsible should be arrested. If you remember, even the police has never summoned any of those people to say, you come for interviews. At least you should have a decency to say, oh, a victim was accused, Sishua, that he was responsible for this and that crime. The very least that you can do as police is to invite those people. Or if I'm working for the president, the president should drop me so that it doesn't seem like he's covering me up. So when you hear the president saying this kind of thing, like, no, this is unacceptable, it's very difficult to believe that message, because his conduct over the past 4 years in relation to acts of violence committed by members of his inner circle and the cadres themselves have not attracted the kind of attention that you'd expect from the president, which is to condemn attacks on anyone, regardless of the perpetrators or the victims, for example. But he hasn't done that, and it should not be like that.
Doc, I want to circle back on the key suspect in this Nkombo case. Like you've put it, he's been identified as somebody that's close to the president, President Hakainde Hichilema. How can you describe the kind of relationship that exists between the president and Gary Nkombo?
Well, from outside, it looks very, very bad. And I, like many Zambians, I would like to know the source of that friction that we see between the president and Gary Nkombo. The way the president has treated Gary Nkombo is disgraceful and disgusting, to say the least. First he kicked Gary out of cabinet. He was minister of local government. If you remember, even when he was appointing cabinet, Gary was one of the last people that were appointed. It's almost as if it was an afterthought. So it's like he was reluctant to appoint him to cabinet, and then he kicked him out of cabinet. We don't know for what reason, because he has never given any reason. There are rumors that it has to do with maybe corruption or something like that. If you are removing somebody for corruption, the correct thing to do after you remove them is to make sure that they are handed to the investigative wings for possible prosecution. I've seen a number of people, for example, on social media saying, no, I'm very unhappy that Gary was removed for suspected corruption, but it hasn't happened. But it hasn't been taken to court. But that is the hallmark of this president, because if you remember, the Auditor General, Dixie Chembe, and a couple of other people from the Ministry of Finance were removed from office with fanfare. They were corrupt and stuff like that. Nothing has happened to them. He has never been taken to court. So even for Gary, when he was removed, there were the crowd of corruption hanging around him, but he had never been taken to court. So you start wondering, why did the president remove Gary from his cabinet position? Somebody who has contributed quite enormously to the president's own election, for example, in 2021. And then he was removed from his party position as chairperson for elections. Again, there was very little that was explained. I do know, for example, that in fact he was removed much earlier than the public came to know. Again, you should be able to explain for somebody of his standing in the party. The president should have the decency to say, listen, you have done A, B, C, D, and I've dropped you for this and that reason. We don't know. Then the president prevented Gary from standing for election into the party's National Management Committee recently. Again, he had a position there. Why are you doing this to somebody who, from outside, looks to be one of the key members of the UPND who has contributed so much to the party? And then, of course, he was denied the opportunity to defend his parliamentary seat, which forced him to stand as an independent candidate. And for me, as an outsider, I start thinking, where is this vindictiveness coming from? If the president can be this vindictive towards a person like Gary, who has contributed so much to the UPND, then what about any other person? And if he can treat Gary like that, he can treat anyone else much, much worse.
Let's look at one other issue, Doc, before we close. I would like us to touch on what is provided for in the Constitution regarding resignations and independent candidates. Is there a requirement that for one to stand as an independent MP, one ought to have resigned from their party 2 months prior? What is the legal position on this matter?
Well, the starting point is to look at the empowering constitutional provision, and that is to be found in Article 51 of the Constitution. That provision provides that a person is eligible for election as an independent candidate to a National Assembly seat if the person is not a member of a political party and has not been 2 months immediately before the date of the election. That's what that constitutional provision provides for. Now, the key word there is before the date of the election. So the date of the election is known. It's 13th August this year, because it's constitutionally prescribed. Now, there was an attempt to amend that provision in Bill 7. If you look at what was taken to Parliament, the UPND tried to remove that, to say it should be amended to before the date of nominations rather than before the date of the election. And I think they were preparing for this scenario where they knew that some of their members may wish to stand as independent. So to prevent them from standing as independent, they wanted to amend that so that it could read as before the date of nominations. Now, objectively speaking, I think it makes sense that you should say before the date of nominations rather than before the date of the election, because it doesn't make sense to speak about the election or when people have already filed their nominations. The key thing, however, is that that provision, that proposed amendment, was not passed. I think members of Parliament who are very self-serving, especially those from the last Parliament, for example, they saw through that and consequently didn't pass that proposed amendment. So it means Article 51 remains as it was before the constitutional amendment that we saw last year. That clearly means that a member of a political party is free to stand as an independent candidate until, at least in this year's election, until 13th June, which marks 2 months before the election. I've seen UPND, supporters like Oliver Sharara misleading people by saying, by quoting a non-existent constitutional provision that talks about before the date of nominations. If that misinformation was peddled by opposition, people will be arrested. They say you are misleading people, because Nkombo and other people have the right to stand as independent candidates, because 2 months before the election is in June. So even if they resigned today or a day before the nomination, they are still eligible to stand as independent candidates.
Doc, I would like to thank you very much for speaking to us this morning.
Thank you so much for having me, Peter.
All right, there you have it. We were having a conversation with political historian Dr. Sishiwa right here on the Red Hot Breakfast. Keep it locked.